What's going on, guys, and welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham, G.S. and Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're talking the Bubba Ray Dudley episode of Broken Skull Sessions from way back when in April 15th, 2022 to be exact. I am very behind on Broken Skull Sessions, and the bummer is that it's a consistently great show. And Bubba Ray, for as polarizing of a figure as he can be in the wrestling world, specifically this year with a lot of his takes and what he said about certain people, I thought this was a great episode. A lot of great looking back on his career in ECW, WWE, even a lot of talk of TNA. And on a lot of these Broken Skull shows, they don't shy away from acknowledging, the TNA stuff or AEW or whatever. We know Jericho did last year when he was on. But still, they don't often go into great detail about it. They did here with the Bully Ray stuff, which I thought was great because it was such a big part of his career in those early 2010s. So a really good episode. I still have to get to the Jeff Jarrett one, Sami Zayn one, Charlotte Flair one, and the Cody Rhodes one. That's going to be the next one I watch and review here on the channel, hopefully soon. They open up the episode, Bubba Ray and Stone Cold Steve Austin talking about Bubba's stuttering gimmick from when he was stuttering in ECW that was brought over in his early days at WWF. He mentions that he and Steve have something in common, that being that they debuted the exact same night in ECW back in September of 1995. I forgot what Steve did that night, but Bubba debuted as a bodyguard for Bill Alfonso and got chokeslammed by 911. He actually showed up to ECW that day as a dare to his friends. He was friends with Tommy Dreamer. He got him an in with the booker or whatever. Tommy wasn't the booker, I don't remember exactly. But he goes into great detail about that story and how he got a job out of it, basically. And Heyman kind of had a role in mind for him, but he wanted Bubba to shave his head. And Bubba had the long locks at this point. He was kind of hesitant about the whole thing, and then Paul's like, all right, if you don't want to do it, that's fine. We probably have something else in mind for you instead. And then Bubba went home and thought, you know what? Opportunity comes a knocking. You take advantage of it, so he shaved his head the next day. He also, the two things that he feared the most in coming into the business and breaking into the business was having his head shaved, which he did very, almost immediately, and then also being called Bubba, because he wasn't a small guy. He was around 400 pounds. He said he was a very fucking big kid, or big guy, whatever, at that point. I think in his 20s around then. He must be, because he's 50, 51 now. This was 25 years ago, so he was probably 25, 26 back then. He didn't want to be called Bubba. Sure enough, they look at him, and people were throwing names out like, oh, you look like a this, you look like a that, and someone said Bubba. He was hoping Heyman wouldn't hear. Heyman did hear. Got called Bubba Ray Dudley. To go back a bit, he talks about how he fell in love initially with wrestling as a kid. He was a fan of the Wild Samoans. He was a fan of Rick Martel. He was a fan of Tony Garea, the Strongbos, the Moondogs. But he was always drawn to tag teams. And when Steve brings up how he was never a big tag team guy as far as being in the business, because if your partner goes down, you're kind of fucked. Bubba never really thought of it like that. And interestingly, I think in the entire time that he and Devon teamed up, neither one of them ever suffered a serious enough injury to where the other one would have to be off of TV or wouldn't be active for any period of time. I mean, they did split up in 2002. That wasn't due to an injury, and we'll get to that later. But thinking back on it now, neither of them really got hurt all that much. And Bubba even said the one injury he ever suffered, it was upon his debut in ECW. Beyond that, never really got hurt over the course of his career, which is pretty impressive. So he and Steve toast to each other before getting into how he got basically robbed, but got ripped off by a fake trainer very early on in his career. He wanted to be in the WWF, and he had a chance to train with Johnny Rodz and among many other people, but he said no, because this guy that offered to train him instead said he had all this money, and he would, allow him to, he would train Bubba Ray, and he would take him in, and he would get him to the WWF. He had an HBO show that he would make Bubba Ray the face and champion of. Obviously, it was all a scam. Just took Bubba Ray's $2,500 or whatever, and then he came into the gym the next day, came into the training facility, if you can even call it that, and asked Bubba, all right, what do you want to learn? And as a result, Bubba was never formally trained. So while eventually kind of just doing the wrestling thing, he also sold cars for money. And he made a lot of money doing that. He had health insurance through that, so it was a good win-win deal. He learned a lot from the legends in ECW, people like Terry Funk, people like Shane Douglas. And it was also in ECW he learned a lot about psychology. Bam Bam Bigelow was the one who taught him how to taste Lace's boots. And he never forgot about that, and he never will for as long as he's in wrestling. He talks the Dudley Boyz gimmick and how The idea of it was that their father was basically sleeping with ring rats. There were Dudley boys all across the country and whatever. It was based off the Hanson brothers from Slapshot. And he talks about how he kind of was able to get by with no experience early on, but it wasn't until he had a match with Jimmy Del Rey, who was great, he said. And Jimmy Del Rey didn't intentionally expose Bubba. Bubba kind of exposed himself. And having an awful showing, the crowd did not take that lightly and completely shit on him. They turned on him, and it was really hard to kind of win those people back over. He talks about how, or they show the first promo that he had with the Dudleys back in 95, in October of that year, I believe. He and Devon actually started out as rivals, and they had really good chemistry, and he pitched the idea to Heyman, hey, can we become a tag team? Heyman liked the idea. They became a tag team, hit their first 3D by when he turned on the Sandman and Spike Dudley, and it was off to the races from there. He always did whatever it took to reach that next level as a heel, to get that heat, because he talks about, he mentions this all the time in Busted Open Radio, how much he hates cool heels, fucking hates them. And he talks about how the fans made ECW what it was, and he compares ECW to Napster, where it, went bankrupt, it's not around anymore, but it changed for Napster, the music business, and for wrestling, ECW changed the wrestling business. He heard rumors that WWE was interested in he and Devon. They had a friend that was a journalist, I believe, named Blackjack Brown. I think he may have recently passed away. I might be wrong. If that wasn't Blackjack, it might have been someone else. But either way, they had a three-way call because you don't want to be the first one to show, not weakness, but be the first one to make a move. And because if you do that, it shows that you have less, not incentive, but less bargaining tool, whatever, however that makes sense. And by doing that, they had a three-way call with Blackjack Brown and Vince Russo to kind of discuss what the ideas would be in coming in. And he believed every word Heyman said when they were in ECW. He was a big motivational guy and saying, hey, we are ECW, blah, 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 blah. Couldn't pay the bills, so he couldn't really stick around for that much longer. It didn't help that going into WWE, Public Enemy preceded them. Public Enemy was the first ECW act to go from, signed to a full-time deal from ECW to WWF. And they left a very bad taste in WWF's mouth because they weren't doing what was asked of them and they weren't around for very long. They were very messy, sloppy, whatever. So when they signed and then they met with Vince about what the plans for them would be, Bubba asked about the push. Vince said, we don't give out pushes here, we give out opportunities. That's a very Vince McMahon-esque line. So they rewatched their WWF debut from 1999, and he knew right off the bat, because the Public Enemy shit, they were going to be tested right away. Right away. So in their debut, they really laid it on thick to APA. They clobbered him with 2x4s or whatever it might have been, just beat the shit out of him, because they knew at least it would look good on TV if they really went in hard and were stiff with the APA, who could obviously take it. They knew the APA were getting their receipt and were getting their revenge the next week on TV. Sure enough, they film an angle where the Dudleys were backstage. They get attacked by the APA. They showed it here. The APA just fucking obliterate them with trash cans, which were, it was a shoot, as they say, as far as it being real and no easy bumps. Beat the shit out of them. And that earned their respect, I guess, because they shook their hands afterward. The entire roster was shown. Not shown, but Bubba said he could see the entire roster watching this from afar. And they passed the test, and it was all smooth sailing from there, he mentioned. And they only really traveled with each other, he says. He and Devon, as far as like whose brain he kind of picked and who he spent the most time with, it was only really Devon, he said, during their entire time in WWE. They talk about the tables match with the Hardy Boys from the Royal Rumble 2000 pay-per-view, that really, really good match. And they didn't get a lot of time. They were cut for time quite a bit over the course of their careers, he said. But he was happy he got his moment in MSG. And if he had never had anything else after that, at least he had his moment in MSG standing atop the table, celebrating with the audience, which was really cool. He mentions how the Get the Tables catchphrase with he and Devon came naturally, and they always wanted to steal the show. That was their key in the Attitude Era. There were so many people that were over main eventers. They were never going to be main eventers on major pay-per-views, but they could go in there and try to get themselves over by stealing the show, which is what they tried to do every single time. They rewatched the very famous Mae Young powerbomb off the stage and how they did it once before and he was very gentle with her. And before they did it the second time off the stage, she went up to him and said, I want you to slam me like I'm one of the boys. And that sounds dirty, so get your mind out of the gutter. But she was like, listen, give it to me like I'm one of the boys. Do not go easy on me. I'm shocked she wasn't broken in half, because even back then she was probably late 70s, early 80s. Probably closer to Probably late 70s, but still, she was pretty old. She could have been broken and battered shattered within pieces if he hit her real hard. And he did, but thankfully she was okay, shockingly enough. From there, they talked the Triangle Ladder match from WrestleMania 2000, which was not the first TLC match. There was a difference between themselves, the Hardys, and Edge and Christian. And he actually mentions he came up with the TLC name. He thought it was dumb at first, because obviously TLC also can mean tender love and care. He's like, oh, that's stupid. I hope no one heard that. They stuck with it, and obviously it's become legendary. They rewatched the TLC 2 match from WrestleMania 17. Going in, he wanted it to be perfect. Everyone involved wanted it to be perfect. And because they couldn't hear the fans, I guess Austin obviously wrestled on that show against The Rock. He could hear the fans. These 6 guys could not. All the noise to them went upwards and towards the middle upper area of the arena in the Astrodome. So they couldn't hear the audience, and they thought the match sucked because the fans weren't reacting. He mentions, I don't know if he was joking, but he said they were cut for time again right beforehand, and the main event might have needed more time, taking a shot, a jokingly shot here at Steve Austin, who he's talking with on the show, of course. And he mentioned that right before the match, they were arguing. Now, I don't know. He mentions this was the one argument they ever got in. And I assume he's talking about him and Devon. I don't know whose side who was on. But here's basically what happened. They did a lot of great spots in that match. But they wanted to do 2 mega spots. One with Bubba going off the top of the ladders, crashing down to ringside through 2 tables. They did that a year earlier, WrestleMania 2000, if not in TLC 1. They wanted to repeat that spot, but this time Matt Hardy going down with him. And it was a case of whether that be the last holy shit moment, or if it's the spear off the ladder from Edge to Jeff Hardy. Bubba thought that spear to Jeff, you cannot replicate that. That'll never be done again. It's an incredible once-in-a-lifetime spot, which obviously it gets replayed a lot more than the Bubba and Matt Hardy one does. That should end the match before Edge and Christian win. But other people, I guess maybe Devon and other people that were involved in the match, I forgot who he said, if he even said at all, whose side who was on as far as who wanted what. And they ultimately went with the double bump through the tables as the final spot right before right after the spear from Edge to Hardy. And even Bubba, you can tell, and him talking about it here, he thought and still thinks, over 20 years later, it was still very dumb that they did that, and the order of spots should have been swapped. Didn't hurt the match, but he does make a good point, though, I will say. From there, they talk about how, they talk about the spear spot, how it came to be, and all that other sort of stuff. And currently, he's feeling great at 50, he says, and he cherished that moment with all 6 guys at Hall of Fame 2018, in the WWE Hall of Fame, that is. Himself, Devon, Edge, Christian, Matt, Jeff Hardy, all celebrated on the stage over Hall of Fame 2018 weekend, which was really cool. They talk about the split from Devon in 02 and how it was Vince's idea. No shit. And early on, he was not comfortable. He was not confident as a singles guy. He made the most of it, though, he said. And he actually had to fill in, he said, for Steve, when Steve walked out on Brock, and they were supposed to do Steve Austin and Brock on Raw in June of 2002. Steve Austin walks out, so then Bubba has to do the match instead. And he was, joking with him, like, oh, I had to do the match instead. I had to face Brock. That sucked, blah, 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 which was funny. So from there, they talk about how, again, the split, and they reunited, obviously, at Survivor Series 02. They were told that day. He was very happy about that. They even told Vince before they split in 02, this is not a good idea. And Vince did it anyway, obviously, and it sucked. Bubba tried his hardest on Raw, just he was never going to be a top guy. He even made the comparison, and he's right. Although they're not the Legion of Doom, he even said, would you split the Road Warriors? Did anyone want to see Hawk or Animal on their own? The answer is no. And that just wouldn't work. That wouldn't have worked as well. So they didn't do that. Again, after they split them in 02. They didn't really do a whole lot after that. They probably did hold the tag titles a few times from the years that followed on SmackDown. I think they won the tag titles soon after on Raw, but they went to SmackDown. They worked with some teams over there. They were off TV for a while in 05. And then they offered to actually go down to OVW and work with some of the newer people, specifically Mercury and Morrison, who got called up, did well. They thought that would bode well for their future, but it didn't. They actually remained off TV, brought back for One Night Stand 05, and then after that, they just disappeared from the company. The idea was they weren't released, but they wanted I guess the WWE, in re-signing them, their contracts were up. They were going to give them a lesser downside. Bubba said, I just don't think that makes sense, so I don't want to do that. So they went their separate ways, and no bad blood between the two sides. As far as the differences between WWE and TNA, he mentions that WWE I guess not anymore, but had the ultimate accountability with Vince McMahon. Accountability is a weird word to use here, but what he means by that is he can go through the curtain and know how he did immediately and always trust that person's opinion, that being Vince. So Bubba would walk through the curtain, either get like a thumbs down or Vince would talk to him or the thumbs up. He always strived to get that thumbs up. He never chased a hug, he said. The thumbs up was enough for him to know that what he did worked and that Vince liked it. He even mentioned that one time he and Devon went 5 minutes over the allotted time in a match with Right to Censor, which sounds fucking random on SmackDown back in the day. And 5 minutes to go over on your match time is just, at that point, you might be writing your own pink slip to get fired from WWE. And he goes to the curtain. Vince is right there as soon as he walks through. And he says, if you ever think about going over again on my show, it better be as good as that. So threatening him, sure, as he should have, because you can't go over your allotted time. But it was also kind of a compliment in a way, where they went over because the match was so good. He said, if you ever do that again, don't ever do that again. But if you do, it better be as good as that was, which I thought was funny. They talk about his TNA run. They go for a long time about the TNA stuff and went into great detail about that, how they went over to TNA, I think in 2006. They worked with all the teams over there, and a variety of promotions too, not just in TNA, but they were also All Japan Tag Team Champions, or they went over to All Japan, they worked with New Japan Tag Teams. They were champions pretty much everywhere for a very long period of time. They won it all, worked with all the teams. Devon even said, I kind of want to try the singles stuff one more time, and Bully said, this is probably the best time to do it. So I thought this was a great story. I remember this when it was happening 12 years ago, and in hearing him recount it now, it's even more like, it's that much cooler. I thought the story they went with was perfect, because over the course of 20 years, he says no one kicked out of the 3D. I think there was at least one person, forgot his name. It was in ECW though. Someone kicked out from the 3D in ECW. From that point forward, though, no one else kicked out of the move. And they didn't mention that here as far as who kicked out of it in ECW. To his memory, maybe he just left it out here or he forgot. I'm pretty sure someone kicked out of it early on. Beyond that, though, no one had ever kicked out of the 3D. Chris Sabin did. And the stipulation of their match with the Motor City Machine Guns was, if you lose, if Team 3D loses, they have to retire. They either win the tag team titles or they have to retire. So they lost. They retired as a team. And then that same night, Bully Ray, or Bubba Ray, attacks Devon and becomes Bully Ray. He's repackaged as Bully Ray. And, it was a great reason for a split, because it was Devon who pinned Chris Sabin. Sabin kicks out. And it was this holy shit moment, like holy fuck, like he just kicked out of the move. And it was because of Devon. He was the weak link. I never needed you. It was a great reasoning. And I remember not being overly excited at the time at the idea of a Bubba Ray and Devon feud. But it made sense, and they actually, obviously, Devon really didn't go on to do much. He was like a TV champion for a little while in 2012. That just wasn't good. I think he may have found another partner for a brief period. But Bully Ray, obviously, was off and running for him as a single star, and he fucking killed it. He pitched a 1-year arc, he said, to creative. He had this whole idea for what he wanted to do. The story arc that he's talking about, I feel like might have been more than 1 year, because he turned heel in late 2010, so 12 years ago. The run that he kind of went on, which was so cool, kind of everything tied together by the end, it was a literal 3-year run. From late 2010, when he first became Bully Ray, up until he lost the TNA World Heavyweight Champion. Honestly, looking back on it now, that entire period for Bully Ray in TNA is underappreciated. People knew how good Bully Ray was, but everything with him made sense as far as the programs he had and what he did, turning face, turning heel, the aces and eights stuff. The group itself sucked. I applaud the story they were trying to tell. The amount of losers in that group did not help, and they were never really booked to look strong ever. But I could see what they were going for, and they really dragged that story out for a very long time. But he's very proud of the time he spent in aces and eights. Bischoff even approached him with the idea, hey, do you want to lead this new motorcycle gang stable? And Bully Ray thought it sucked, but it was the same thing like when he was asked to shave his head by Heyman. Yeah, I'll do it if it's an opportunity. And he ended up loving it. He got to work with Hogan. He got to work with Sting. I don't think he teamed with Hogan. Hogan had his last match in TNA in 2012. That might be his last match, period, was in TNA at a house show 10 years ago. Hope to God he never fucking wrestles again. I think he got to have a couple matches with Hogan in the ring. On TV, I don't remember. He probably had untelevised matches with Hogan, did Bully Ray in TNA. Don't remember any TV matches, though. But he did have that whole storyline where he started dating Brooke, and he gained Hulk's trust, and then he turned on them and joined Aces and Eights, which he was a part of the entire time. It was a really good story, on paper anyway, and the execution wasn't the greatest, but they tried. But on that same note of working with Hogan, he mentions that he backed down from Hogan one time on TV. Hogan came up to him afterward and said, never back down from me, because they want to put you on the same level that I am. Which, there's a lot of stories said about Hogan, but that is pretty cool if that's true. But anyway, so he was really proud of the $7,100 person, house they pulled in for that Lockdown 2013 match where he won the TNA World Heavyweight Championship, his first of two in that company, with Jeff Hardy at Lockdown 2013. So, it's not Astrodome numbers he mentions, but for TNA, that was a lot of people in one building. 7,000 people is a lot for TNA. Even, obviously, by today's standards, that would be incredible. But, back then, that was still a pretty good number. He praised Ken Anderson's role, the role that he played in the entire thing. And he loved the TNA run overall, he said. His entire idea as far as being a hated heel was to get as much heat on himself as possible so he can ultimately put that babyface over in the end. It makes them look that much better. Fast forward to 2015. Gets an email, he said, from Road Dogg about returning in the Royal Rumble in Philly. And that was why they wanted them there, because they were in Philly, ECW country. Makes sense. He had actually never been in a Rumble before. That was the first Rumble he'd ever been in, was in 2015. He had been at the Rumble in matches, but never in a Royal Rumble, interestingly enough. So they rewatched that return. I fucking loved that Bubba Ray Dudley return in 2015. People were saying, oh, what about Bully Ray? It made sense. They should have done Bully Ray later on and allowed him to do that and give him the green light. Vince got cold feet. They don't talk about that here, which, by the way, I'll get into momentarily. But yeah, they talk about that return and whatever, which I thought was great. They were in Philly. They had the music back, and it was fucking great. The crowd reacted like he was Stone Cold Steve Austin. He wasn't in there for very long, but it was a very, very cool return. And he mentioned how he was so overwhelmed by that crowd reaction and the loud noise that he got upon coming out that he blacked out on his way to the ring. He honestly had no idea what was going on until he started running towards the ring, and then he was back in it. So we actually asked Devon the night before if he could use their tag team moves with himself and R-Truth, because they just replaced one black guy with another, from Devon to R-Truth. Very kind of a little bit on the nose, but he asked Devon about it the night before. Devon said it was fine, so I thought that was really cool. That was it for the WWE talk as far as that run. They don't talk about that you would never even know that he and Devon came back for another tag team run in the company from 2015 to 2016. Now, granted, they didn't do anything. They never won the tag team titles. They lost every major match they had. But they were around for a good year. That initial return, the night after SummerSlam in 2015, is still one of my favorite returns of all time. It's just absolutely incredible. And they don't talk about that here for whatever reason. So they don't talk about that return run. And they also don't talk about how he almost was Bully Ray in WWE. You could tell Steve Austin was a big Bully Ray fan back when he was doing it and even now. So the fact that Steve does not... I know Bully Ray's probably been on Steve's podcast, in recent years. So they probably have talked about this before. I know he's been on Talk is Jericho before talking about this, but... yeah, he was almost Bully Ray in 2016, but Vince got cold feet, and they nixed the idea, and that was why they went their separate ways, and Team 3D, or the Dudley Boys or whatever, left WWE. So, it wasn't under any bad blood or whatever, they just kind of went their separate ways, and they've always been on good terms. But anyway, so they completely ignore all of that, and talk about the origin of the Bubba Cut, or his finisher. They talk about Team 3D Academy in Danbury, Connecticut, which I go there all the time for wrestling shows. So I knew that he had a school here. I would never go to one. I'm not going to train to become a professional wrestler, but it is pretty cool, though. They also have a school in Florida. And as far as his current take on the business, because he's very honest with a lot of what he thinks about the current state of pro wrestling on Busted Open Radio. So they plug that here. And as far as his current take on the business, he feels, and honestly, he's not wrong. There are some things that Bully Ray says I do not agree with at all. The stuff that he said about Moxley specifically at the beginning of the year was pretty fucking dumb. But honestly, what he says here is not wrong at all. He says that the people watching wrestling nowadays are all the diehards. It's all the people that were already watching. They need more casual viewers. They need more people that... They need new fans. Both companies, all the companies, are all the diehards that are left over. Like the core wrestling audience. They need to build off of that and create new fans. That goes for everybody. And he thinks that a lot of things can change in the wrestling business. And he mentions AEW quite a bit, by the way, which is pretty cool. They don't cut that out or bleep. Why would they bleep? That'd be pretty dumb. But anyway, so he mentions a lot of things need to change. But if you go back to basics, that's really what works. He's not a fan of doing one-offs and coming in to put over this person. He's more of a fan of doing long-term storytelling. Since this aired in April, he's actually done stuff in the NWA where I think he's still doing stuff. He actually wrapped up his story, I thought, with Mike Knox at NWA 74. A few that I don't really give a fuck about, but they had a fine tables match, as good of a tables match as you're going to get between Bubba Ray Dudley and Mike Knox in 2022. So maybe that's what he's talking about. He's not going to come in to put anyone over, in one night, but he will over the course of a couple months. We saw that in Ring of Honor. Some of his Ring of Honor work I just didn't give a shit about, but for the couple of years he was there, he always put over the other people in the end, whether it was Mark Haskins, whether it was the Briscoes, whether it was Flip Gordon at Final Battle 2018. He always put people over for the most part in Ring of Honor. So, you can never blame the guy for burying other people, I will say that. But anyway, he enjoys storytelling, he says, and that he would come back to any promotion for the right opportunity. I guess the Mike Knox stuff was the right opportunity because he went to NWA a couple months after this aired and had a whole program with Knox over the summer, where he won in the end, oddly enough, at NWA 74. He has no problem taking bumps. He still takes bumps on occasion with his wrestling school and at indie shows and stuff like that. And as a fun fact, he mentions here, the last line that Freddie Blassie ever said on WWE TV was in a segment with the Dudleys, himself, and Steve Austin, where Steve Austin wheeled him down to the ring in a wheelchair, and his last words in WWE TV were, "Devon, get the tables," and that's pretty cool. And that was it for the Broken Skull Sessions with Bubba Ray Dudley. Really, really good episode here. Honestly, a lot better than I thought it was, because I haven't heard a lot about the recent episodes with Sammy, Charlotte, Jeff, and who was the other person? Cody Rhodes, obviously, how can I forget? I haven't heard a lot about those since they aired months ago. I am looking forward to watching them, and hopefully I can get through them soon. They're just very long. They're all like an hour and a half, close to 2 hours, so it takes time to watch them and review them and whatever, but I hope to watch them soon. This was a really good one, so I thoroughly enjoyed it. 2 thumbs up for me. Check it out if you haven't already on Peacock. Thank you guys for checking out my review of Broken Skull Sessions with Bubba Ray Dudley. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. Have a great one, guys. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.